Nut seeds really are pretty easy to start, like chestnuts. These are types of things where you can get seeds and fill a pot, fill it almost all the way to the top with soil. Just laying it on top of the soil and then covering that with some loose, really loose stuff. A lot of the time people will put chestnuts in a specific orientation. When the chestnut germinates, first the radical comes out. That's the progenitor of the root. It's looking for the soil, so it comes out, goes down, and then out of that same exiting, the first shoot comes up and goes. So a lot of the time, if you want it to go really easily for the plant, you can put it on the side so that it will come out and then they'll split. With the nuts, it's a kind of a balance. You want to keep them moist but not too wet because they can rot pretty easily. They can get fungus. And they really can't dry. If they dry out completely, it's kind of shot. Once they start germinating and popping out of the pot, you can wait till they get, maybe 6 to 8 inches, and then soak the whole thing, like make it into a puddle, make it completely soaked. And when you lift them out, the roots will just tease right apart, no problem. And then you basically have bare root stock that you can either put into pots individually, like these have been, or right in the ground at that time. For a lot of the nut species, the recommendations are to start late winter, kind of like you would with tomatoes or something like that. I don't know if it's so important to get that early of a head start on it, because essentially, if you can't have them grown outside from the beginning, what you end up getting is really a bad case of leaf scald. You can see there's a few of these that stretched really, really far, and that was because they were grown inside and there wasn't a whole lot of light. It wasn't very strong. So they got up and they put out these massive leaves. The plant is reacting to the environmental conditions that it has, so it's not really experiencing a maximum temperature that's very high, not a very low minimum. And you bring them outside, and then the first day in the sun, if you don't make it a very smooth, easy transition, the leaves just aren't used to that and they get leaf scald, and a lot of them will just fall off and die, and then they'll have to restart. If we were planting these outside, we could put them in the ground right now and not worry about it any further, as long as they're of a good hardiness. These might be in pots this winter, which is a dicey situation. And what you pretty much have to do in that case, heal them in, or you can kind of mound wood chips. If this whole pile was going to stay outside, I would mound wood chips kind of up to here and around them to help insulate the roots a little bit for the winter. If you wanted to try to germinate any nitrogen fixing seeds, a lot of the time they look like a bean. They're very hard, super tough shell. So honey locust, black locust, carragana, you might do well to do some scarification. There's a lot of different methods you could use for getting those seeds to germinate. One that I was discussing with my friend Sean is kind of partly fermenting the seeds. So you can put the seed, like with honey locust, you have these long pods that have tons of sugar in them, and you can kind of smush them up a little bit, put some water in it, and leave it in a jar, and it kind of starts to bubble and it starts to smell really nasty and gross, and you think that everything in there would be no good anymore, but that actually is doing a kind of scarification on the seeds. And then if you just take that pulp and put it in a little bed of soil and plant some just germinating mix on top of it, you'll get a huge germination. There's nothing that would seem more natural than going up to a tree that looks really great, has really awesome qualities, taking seed from that and planting it and hoping that you get something like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. It really depends on the type of plant that you're dealing with. Like with apples, growing from seed might be great to get rootstocks, and who knows, you might end up with a great apple. But if you started from seed with fruit trees, the apple that you wanted might have been growing next to a crab apple, and it was the seeds that you got off that fruit were pollinated by a crab apple, and you may end up with just about anything. So we can talk a little bit about some vegetative propagation. This is a white currant, and these are, the ribes whole family is really, really easy to propagate by cuttings. So these are 6 to 8 inch cuttings that you take. These were taken late winter, hardwood, and you can take a shoot that's this long, cut it up into 3 pieces, and then you essentially, the things that you want to keep in mind are that you want to have about 4 buds below the soil, maybe 2 or 3 buds above the soil. We generally cut the bottom with a low angle, so you kind of get that long surface area of the bottom, because that's where a lot of the root might start. as well as near where the buds are. Dip that in rooting hormone, and then put that into a little potting medium. You can do it in native soil, but you kind of will have a lot more fungus problems that way, and it'll generally be more difficult for the plants to root, and they'll have less success. When we cut the top off, I just put a little bit of wax on the top to seal it so it doesn't dry out. But as you can see, the top, that one bud there grew out, and you have an entire new plant in one spring. So a good way, if you want to be doing this on a reasonable scale and doing a lot of it, having a compost pile that's really predominantly woody rather than high bacteria vegetable, like lots of green. I think that would be a really good way to get a potting medium that'd be good for this type of propagation. So another method of vegetative propagation would be root cuttings also. So things like black locust, if you go out and chop off a piece of root and just put that in soil media, it'll almost always shoot back up. So when you take a cutting, essentially you want to make it long enough that you can have maybe this under the soil and then these above the soil. And this is before the buds broke. The buds are really kind of where the action are. That's where the action is. That's where a lot of the growth is going to happen. And those have the best potential, instead of making a new shoot or leaf, to make roots, because they kind of have that ability to change which direction they're going to grow in. With rubus family, anything that's in the brambles family, they're really adept at doing that. So one of the best ways to propagate these would be called simple layering. So if you wanted, you wouldn't really have to do a cutting with this. You could basically bend this guy over, and then we would have a pot right here just of soil. Cut it one tiny little bit, nick it so that you can get the roots starting to come out of there. Weight it down in the soil, maybe with a little bit of rooting hormone on it, but probably wouldn't even need it. After a little while, it'll probably root out in that pot, and you cut it on the other side, and you can go put your new pot elsewhere. So this is a pear tree that was here before we got here. This is pretty sure it's a Bradford pear. This is the same idea as that layering, but it's called air layering just because you're doing it in the air. So these are really cheap little hinged cups that you can buy. Essentially, it's got a little water reservoir in the bottom here, and then this is like a tapered conical device that'll help suck the water up into the dirt that you put here. So essentially, we're going to prepare our wood by cutting it and then putting some rooting hormone on it, and then hinging this around that wound and filling the whole thing in with soil. I usually don't have 100% success with these, but if it did, you essentially have the equivalent of a 2-year-old tree that's rooted and healthy, and it can happen in as little as 8 weeks. So it's a really nice way to propagate older stuff. They recommend usually to do this type of thing earlier in the season, just after the buds have broke. I'm making 2 cuts that go completely around the stem.
Where are they in relation to the leaves that you just trimmed off? Does it matter?
Right, I mean, I just trimmed this leaf and this leaf and this leaf, and these are all good points where roots might start to come out. So I'm just doing this cut in between there. You want to try to not touch the wound that you're opening up too much with your hand. Yeah. And then you can put a little bit on those buds as well. This is rooting hormone. It's basically just a chemical that induces the plant to produce roots instead of shoots. Just going to come in and try to get that wound right in the middle of this little cup. And don't want to necessarily pack it in too tight, but definitely want to get so there's no big air pockets and the whole thing can stay pretty moist. And the last thing that we would want to do is get a little string and tie this, probably to something over there, just because this bottom reservoir wants to be filled with water for most of the time. So we may have to, I'll do that later on.